This series is brought to you with the co-sponsorship of the Center for the Study of Women. Tonight's guest, as you all know, is Audre Lorde. Before I turn the microphone over to Gloria Wecker from the Anthropology Department and the Center for Afro-American Studies, who will introduce Audre, I want to let you know about upcoming events. And I had a fairly short list, but it's grown. So please bear with me. I've tried to do it somewhat chronologically. The two things are happening this Sunday. There's a celebration of choice from 3 to 5 p.m. at Cal State Long Beach. There are flyers circulating. Also, this Sunday, there's Ladies Against Women at the Wilshire Ebel Theater. March 27th, Bell Hooks is going to be speaking at Cal State Long Beach. There are also flyers, I think that may be some of what Anne's passing out. Also at Cal State LA, in 2 weeks on the 30th of March, there will be a poetry reading by Pat Parker and Cheryl Clark. That's what's being passed out. And that will be at 7:30 in the Alumni Lounge of the University Student Union. I want to make an announcement that at UCLA, there has just been formed a Lesbian and Gay Alumni Association. And on April 13th, right here in this very room, the final speaker in our Lesbian History series will be Ivy Bottini from the Stonewall Democratic Club. And she's going to bring history up to date as she connects it with today's political realities. Now, Michelle Cliff is coming to UCLA on May 18th. And she'll be here in Royce 314 at 7:30 p.m. Oh my, there's more. Abortion rights activists are needed. Defend women's clinics against Operation Rescue. This is March 23rd to 25th. For more information, there's a leaflet up here. I think there are leaflets circulating or on the side. That's the same thing. Okay. Anybody drop keys? We found a set of keys on the sidewalk. If you've lost them, see me. Okay, let me let you... This is an important part of the series. This series would not have happened without the creative energies and hard work of a lot of people. And I'd like to tell you who they are. Mary Smith. There she is. Camille Loya. The women of Lambda Delta Lambda. Mary Zoller. Pat Folks. Helen George. Susie Werka. And Elizabeth Savage. I'd also like to thank Sisterhood Bookstore for bringing their bookstore to us, and the Center for Afro-American Studies for cooperation in bringing Audre Lorde here. And finally, to the Campus Events Commission of UCLA's undergraduate student government, because they are sponsoring a reception, see that blue tablecloth, for Audre. I think the hospitality will increase a little bit. And that's going to be held right here, immediately following Audre's reading and questions. I would also like to let you know that afterwards, Audre will sign books. Now, let me turn the mic over to Gloria Wecker, who is going to introduce Audre. Gloria.
Good evening, everybody. It's an extremely memorable occasion for me to be standing here tonight on this part of the globe and to introduce Audre Lorde to you. This isn't the first time I have done this. I only have done it in another part of the world. Really, this story goes back to 6 years ago when living and working in the Netherlands, I had to go to 2 meetings, and in between these 2 meetings in Rotterdam, I had some time to kill, and so I went into the women's bookstore, and I noticed my eye fell on a book with a fake, purplish, cloudy sky, and I picked it up, and I started reading the back cover, and it immediately captured my attention, and the book was Zami, as you all probably know. The book is the personal history of a young black lesbian in the 40s and in the 50s growing up in New York. At the same time, it's a social history of black lesbian existence. I bought the book, and when I started reading in it, I was swept off my feet by it, and I gave it to some of my black lesbian friends in the Netherlands, and they were equally enthusiastic. And so at a certain point, we had heard that Audre Lorde would be coming to teach at the Free University in Berlin. So we wrote to her saying that we were a group of black lesbians in the Netherlands and that we would like her to come visit us for a long weekend while she was in Berlin. Audre told us afterwards that when she got the letter, she immediately called all of her girlfriends to tell them that of all places there were black dykes in the Netherlands. This is more than just a funny story because it points to the global significance of Audre Lorde. I'm assuming that you all have read some of her work and are in touch with some of the themes that she is working on. But the global significance of Audre Lorde is a point that I find understressed in the United States. For black dykes in the Netherlands, for example, her coming to the Netherlands twice now has resulted in mobilizing women, in organizing. We have formed a group of black lesbians, a political, cultural group, and among other things, through our efforts, library and a documentation center for black women has been established in the Netherlands. Also in the other countries that Audre has traveled to, for example, to Britain, to Germany, to France, New Zealand, Australia, wherever she has come, she has supported the efforts of the black women there and given enormous, tremendous impulses to women's movements all over the world. In that sense, her life, her work is an instrument of change and survival. I'm not going to talk very long because the most eloquent person to talk about her work, obviously, is Audre Lorde herself. If I would have to identify one main theme that characterizes her work, I would have to say that it is her search for wholeness, which is evident in so many ways. And the search for wholeness can only come about or is a corollary of acknowledging and dealing with difference, and whether that difference is within the women's movement or within the black community. She speaks to these and other issues with extraordinary courage and honesty. I honor Audre Lorde for her courage, for her articulateness, and for the incisive passion with which she speaks. I would like to end by asking you to join me in really welcoming poet, lesbian activist, warrior, battler against cancer, anarchist, warrior, poet Audre Lorde.
To hold this. I get a real charge. Okay. Is this going to work? Okay. If it doesn't, just... It's wonderful for me to be here tonight. I want you all to know that. I get a particular charge out of hearing Gloria Wecker say what she said, because I have the greatest of admiration for the groups of black lesbian women I have met in different conditions, in different situations all over the world, to see what in fact they are doing. And so when Gloria speaks of the Sister Outsider Collective in Amsterdam and speaks of the women's houses that have started and the work that is being done, it makes me really, really excited, because it's an example of what happens when empowered women put themselves behind what they believe. And that is why I'm here tonight. I imagine that is why each one of you is here tonight, to look at who am I and how do I use who I am in the service of what I believe. So there is no black lesbian history without white lesbian history, and there is no black lesbian history without black women's history, without black people's history. As we identify who we are, we begin the journey to use that power. It is what empowerment is all about. Power that is not used is dangerous, because power is never quiescent, it's never neutral. If I do not use my power, however relative it is, if I do not find out what it is and learn to use it, someone else is using it. The power you do not use is being used against us. Against me, against you, against our children, against our world. Black lesbian, white lesbian, terrible things are being done in our name. Terrible things are being done in our name. And for those of us who are black, I urge you to remember that we are part of an international community of women. And increasingly around the world, women of color, black women, are looking to us and saying, how are we using our power? Let me tell you a little bit about Zami, Black Lesbian History. I started this book for a number of reasons. One, because I needed to look at where had I found strength in the crises within my life. I started writing this book when I was first diagnosed with having cancer, and I went into an enormous depression. And I reached for what were sources of strength, looking at that. That coincided with my attending a Modern Language Association meeting in 1977. Some of you have heard this story already. And in the ballroom, at one of the plenary meetings, Barbara Smith stood up, was giving a talk, and she identified herself as a black lesbian literary critic, wondering if she could identify herself like that and live to tell the story. I was so enchanted with the bravery of this young black lesbian woman doing that in the Modern Language Association. But I also thought to myself, I did not know Barbara before. That's the first time I met her. And I also thought to myself, oh, if a young black lesbian literary critic is standing up and saying that, that means a lot of us have not been telling our story. She needs to know, yes, it is possible to be a black lesbian and survive, you see. So very often people recently, with varying degrees of warmth or coldness, say to me, why do you always identify yourself as a black lesbian? You are so much else. And of course, none of us can identify ourselves in one way. We are like a cake. We are so many different ingredients. And there will always be forces within our lives pressuring us to pluck one particular piece out of that cake and say, hey, see that jewel? That's me. Don't do it. It is dangerous. Sometimes it appears easier, but it is dangerous. I am a black, lesbian, feminist, warrior, poet, mother, doing my work. And a part of my work is being here, asking each one of you, who are you and how are you doing yours? So I decided to tell some of the stories of being a black lesbian growing up in New York, along with being the youngest daughter of Mahulisa and a West Indian woman. I remember how being young and black and gay and lonely felt. A lot of it was fine, feeling I had the truth and the light and the key, but a lot of it was pure hell. There were no mothers, no sisters, no heroes. We had to do it alone, like our sister Amazons, the riders on the loneliest outposts of the kingdoms of Dahomey. We, young, black, fine, gay, sweated out our first heartbreaks with no office chums to share the confidences. We were good listeners. We never asked for double dates, but didn't we know the rules? Why did we always seem to think that friendships between women were important enough to care about? We moved in a necessary remoteness where, what did you do this weekend, seemed like an impertinent question. We did it cold turkey, and although it resulted in some very imaginative, tough women when we survived, too many of us did not survive at all. I remember Muff, who sat on the same seat in the same dark corner of the Pony Stable bar, drinking the same gin year after year. And one day she slipped off the stool onto the floor and died of a stroke right there between our feet. And we found out later her real name was Josephine. During the 50s in the village, I didn't know the few other black women who were visibly gay at all well. Too often, we found ourselves sleeping with the same white women. We recognized ourselves as exotic sister outsiders who might gain little from banding together. Perhaps our strength might lay in our fewness, our rarity. That was the way it was downtown and uptown, meaning the land of black people seemed very far away, sometimes hostile territory. Diane was fat and black and beautiful, and knew it long before it became fashionable to think so. Her cruel tongue was used to great advantage, spilling out her devastatingly uninhibited wit that demolished anyone who came too close to her. That is, when she was not busy deflowering the neighborhood's resident virgins. One day I noticed her enormous bosom, which matched my own, and it felt quite comforting rather than competitive. It was clothed in a CCNY sweatshirt, and I realized in profound shock for the first time that someone else beside me in this village gay girl scene was a college student at one of those uptown, meaning past 14th Street, colleges. Now, we would rather have died than mention classes or tests or books other than those books that everyone else was discussing at the moment, which was usually Anne Bannon. This was the 50s, and the gulf between the village gay scene and the college crowd was sharper and far more acrimonious than any town or gown wore. There were not enough of us, but we surely tried. I remember thinking for a while that I was the only black lesbian living in the village until I met Felicia. Felicia with the face of a spoiled nun, skinny, sharp brown, sat on my sofa at 7th Street with her enormous eyelashes that curled back upon themselves twice. She had brought over 2 Siamese cats. Felicia and I came to love each other very much, even though our physical relationship was confined to cuddling. We were both part of that freaky bunch of lesbians who weren't into role-playing, and who the butches and the femmes, black and white, disparaged with terms like kai-kai or AC/DC. You remember, huh? Kai-kai was the same name that was used for gay girls who slept with Johns for money, prostitutes. I thought we were the only gay black women in the world, or at least in the village, which at the time was a state of mind extending all the way from river to river below 14th Street, and in pockets throughout the area still known as the Lower East Side. I had heard tales from Flea and others about the proper black ladies who came downtown on Friday night after the last show at Smalls to find a gay girl to go muff diving with. Downtown in the gay bars, I was a closet student and an invisible black. Uptown at Hunter, I was a closet dyke and a general intruder. Maybe 4 people altogether knew I wrote poetry, and I usually made it pretty easy for those 4 of them to forget. It was not that I didn't have friends, and good ones. There was a loose group of young lesbians, white, except for Flea and myself, who hung out together. Apart from whatever piece of the straight world we each had a separate part in. We not only believed in the realities of sisterhood, that word which was to be so abused 2 decades later, we also tried to put it into practice with varying results. We cared for and about each other, sometimes with more or less understanding, regardless of who was entangled with whom at any given time, in bed or otherwise. And there was always a place to sleep. There was always something to eat and a listening ear for anybody who wandered into the crew. There was always somebody calling you on the telephone to interrupt those fantasies of suicide. And that is as good a working definition of friend as any. However imperfectly, we tried to build a community of sorts where we could, at the very least, survive within a world we correctly perceived to be quite hostile to us. We talked endlessly about how best to create that mutual support, which 20 years later is still being discussed in the women's movement, except now most of you think it is a brand new concept. But lesbians were the only black and white women in New York City in the 50s who were making any real attempt to communicate with each other. And we learned certain lessons from each other, the value of which is not lessened by the things we did not learn. For both Flea and me, it seemed that loving women was something that other black women just did not do. And if they did, it must be in some fashion in some place that was totally inaccessible to us because we could never find them, except for Saturday nights in the Bagatelle, where neither Flea nor I was stylish enough to be noticed. My straight black girlfriends, like Jean and Crystal, either ignored my love for women considered it interestingly avant-garde, or tolerated it as another example of my craziness. In other words, it was allowable as long as it wasn't too obvious and didn't reflect upon them in any way. At least my being gay kept me from being a competitor for whatever men happened to be upon their horizons. It also made me much more reliable as a confidant. I never asked for anything more. Sometimes we would pass black women on 8th Street, the invisible but visible sisters, or in the Bagatelle or Laurel's. These are bars that were popular at the time. I'm going to read some more about Laurel's. And our glances might cross, but we never looked into each other's eyes. We acknowledged our kinship by passing in silence, looking the other way. But we were always on the lookout, Flea and I, for that telltale flick of the eye, that certain otherwise prohibited openness of expression, that definiteness of voice that would suggest, hey, I think she's gay. After all, doesn't it take one to know one? I was gay and I was black. The latter fact was irrevocable. Armor, mantle, and wall. Often when I had the bad taste to bring that fact up in a conversation with other gay girls who were not black, I would get the feeling that I had in some way breached some sacred bond of gayness, a bond that I always knew was not sufficient for me. This was not to deny the closeness of our group, nor the mutual aid of those insane, glorious, contradictory years. It is only to say that I was acutely conscious, from the ID problem of getting into the Bagatelle on Friday nights, to the summer days at Gay Head Beach when I was the only one who wouldn't worry about getting a burn, I was aware that my relationship as a black woman to our shared lives was different from theirs, and would be, gay or straight. The question of acceptance had a different weight for Felicia and me. In a paradoxical sense, once I accepted my position as different from the larger society, as well as from any single sub-society, black or gay, I felt I did not have to try so hard. To be accepted, to look femme, to be straight, to look straight, to be proper, to look nice, to be loved, to be liked, to be approved. What I did not say to myself was how much harder I had to try merely to stay alive, or rather, to stay human. How much stronger a person I became in that trying. If nobody's going to dig you too tough anyway, it really doesn't matter so much what you dare to explore. Like when your black sisters on the job think you're crazy and collect money between themselves to buy you a hot comb and straightening iron on their lunch hour. And they stick it anonymously into your locker in the staff room so that later when you come down for a coffee break and open your locker, the damn thing falls out on the floor with a clatter, and all 95% of your library co-workers who are very, very white want to know what it's all about. Like when your black brother calls you a ball buster and tricks you up into his apartment and tries to do it to you against the kitchen cabinets, just as he says to take you down a peg or two. When all the time you'd gone up there to begin with, fully intending to get a little in the first place, because all the girls I knew who were possibilities were too damn complicating, and I was just plain and simple horny as hell. And I got out of being raped, although not mauled, by leaving behind a batch of lies, and it was the first time in my life, since I left my mother's house, that I was in a physical situation which I could not handle physically. In other words, the bastard was stronger than I was, and believe me, it was an instantaneous consciousness raiser. As I say, when the sisters think you're crazy and embarrassing, and the brothers want to break you open to see what makes you work inside, And the white girls look at you like some exotic morsel that has just crawled out of the walls onto their plate. But don't they love to rub their straight skirts up against the edge of your desk in the college literary magazine office after class? And the white boys all talk either money or revolution, but they can never quite get it up. Then it doesn't really matter too much if you have an afro long before the word even existed. I didn't know if you'd found it. Would you hold that now to the end? And whatever you get from it, make it work inside of you for a little bit, right? Part of that's a real jerk-off, and I want it to detonate inside you. How about it? The bagatelle. The bagatelle. How many of you here remember the bagatelle? Oh, good. It's always someone else? Yeah, I'm really glad. On University Place, since we're into history, right? Those of you who are taking notes, was on University Place between 10th and 11th Street. I walked down those 3 little streets. Is this thing really working? It's hitting my necklace. Okay. You think that's what it is? Okay. It doesn't sound as if it's working. That's why I asked. You okay? Okay. I walked down those 3 little steps into the bagatelle on a weekday night in 1956. There was an inner door guarded by a male bouncer, ostensibly to keep out the straight male intruders come to gawk at the lessies. But in reality, it was there to keep out those women deemed undesirable. And all too frequently, undesirable meant black. Women stood 3 deep around the bar between the tables and in the doorway to the postage stamp-sized dance floor. By 9 p.m., the floor was packed solid with women's bodies, moving sensuously, slowly to the jukebox beat of Ruth Brown's "When Your Friends Have Left You All Alone and You Have No One to Call Your Own," or Frank Sinatra's "Set 'em Up, Joe, I Got Another Story." And when I moved through the bunches of women cruising each other in the front room, or doing a slow fish on the dance floor in the back, with the smells of cigarette smoke and the music and the hair pomade whirling together like incense through charged air, it was hard for me to believe that my being an outsider had anything to do with being a lesbian. But when I, a black woman, saw no reflection in any of the faces there, week after week after week, I knew perfectly well that being an outsider in the bagatelle had everything to do with being black. The society within the confines of the bagatelle reflected the ripples and eddies of the larger society that had spawned it. And what allowed the bagatelle to survive as long as it did also sold watered-down drinks at inflated prices to lonely dykes who had no other social outlet or community gathering place. So rather than the idyllic picture created by false nostalgia, the 50s were really straight, white America's cooling-off period. Let's pretend we're happy and that this is the best of all possible worlds, and we will blow those nasty commies to hell if they dare to say otherwise. The Rosenbergs had just been executed. The transistor radio had just been invented, and frontal lobotomy was the standard solution for any persistent deviation. Let's put our living in a context. In 1956, for many Americans, Elvis Presley and his stolen black rhythms were of the Antichrist. So young America's growing pains within the bagatelle was represented by fashion conflicts between the blue jeans set and the Bermuda shorts set. Then, of course, there were those who fell in between, either by virtue of our art or our craziness or our color. Now, the breakdown into the mommies and daddies was an important part of lesbian relationships in the bagatelle. If you asked the wrong woman to dance, you'd get your nose broken in the alley down the street by her butch, who had followed you out of the bag for exactly that purpose. It was safer to keep to yourself, and you were never supposed to ask who was who, which is why there was such heavy emphasis upon correct garb. The well-dressed gay girl was supposed to give you enough cues for you to know. For some of us, however, role-playing reflected all the depreciating attitudes toward women which we loathed in straight society. It was a rejection of those roles that had led us to the life in the first place. Instinctively, and without particular theory or any political position or dialectic, we recognized oppression as oppression, no matter where it came from. And as I have said before, it is not the function of a woman, any woman, to love or to accept the psyche of her oppressor, even when that psyche is embodied in another woman. For some of us, those lesbians who had carved some niche in the pretend whirl of dominance and subordination rejected, sometimes very cruelly, what they called our confused lifestyle. And of course, they were in the majority. Felicia was so late one Sunday afternoon for our photography lesson that Muriel was the woman with whom I had just started to live, Muriel and I went off to Laurel's without her, because you had to be really early on Sundays at Laurel's if you wanted to get something to eat. The swing rendezvous had closed their doors, but at Laurel's on Sunday afternoons there was free brunch with any drink, and that meant all you could eat. Now, many of the gay bars around this time used this to get Sunday afternoon business, because Sunday afternoon was a traditionally slow time. But the word got out very quickly that Laurel's had the best food. There was a Chinese cook of no mean talent. He cooked back and he kept it coming. After the word got around, every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, there would be a line of gay girls in front of Laurel's stretching all the way to the corner. We were smoking and talking, and all of us trying to pretend that we had all just happened to arrive there this time by accident. And when the doors opened, there would be a discreet but determined stampede. First to the bar to buy a drink, because you couldn't eat unless you had bought, your drink, and then to the food tables, which were set up in the rear of the lounge. Everyone tried to keep our cool, pretending we couldn't care less for barbecued spare ribs with peach and apricot sweet sauce, or succulent pink shrimp swimming in thick golden lobster, dotted with bits of green scallion and bright yellow egg drops, tiny pieces of onion afloat on top. There were stacked piles of crispy browned egg rolls filled with chicken and celery rolled together, fried with a touch of sesame paste. There were fried chicken bits, and every once in a great while a special delicacy, like fresh crab. But only the first lucky few got to taste those special dishes, so it was worthwhile being first in line and pushing that cool image a little askew. We were healthy, young, female animals, mostly more alive than most of our other peers. We were robust, healthy, active women. Our blood was always high. Our pockets were always empty. And a free meal in convivial surroundings, meaning around other lesbians, was a big treat for most of us, even if we had to purchase it at the price of a bottle of beer, 50 cents, with many complaints. Dancing wasn't allowed at Laurel's, so it never got to be as popular as the Bagatelle, except on Sunday afternoons. Muriel preferred it because it was quieter. Trix ran the place, and she always had a hand for her girls. Tiny and tough, with a permanent Florida tan and a Bronx accent, she took a shine to Muriel and me, and sometimes she would buy us a beer or sit down and talk if the place wasn't too crowded. We all knew the situation with gay bars, how they came in and out of existence with such regularity, and who rarely profited from them. Actually, the lifespan of most of them was under a year, with the notable exception of a few like the Bagatelle. Laurel's, unfortunately, went the way of all the other gay bars, like the Swing and Snooki's and the Grapevine, the Sea Colony and the Pony Stable Inn. Each closed after a year or so, while another opened and caught on somewhere else. But for that year, Laurel's served as an important place for those of us who met, made some brief space for ourselves. On summer Sunday afternoons, Muriel and I would split from the gay beach at Coney Island, take the subway back home in time to wash up and dress, and then saunter over to Laurel's to get there in ample time for the food at 4 o'clock. I had my first open-color confrontation with a gay girl one Sunday afternoon in Laurel's. Muriel and I had just come back from Reese Park, full of sun and sand. We had made love with the salt still on our skins, then bathed, washed our hair, and got ready to go out. I put on my faded cord riding breeches with the suede crotch, and a pale blue short-sleeved sweatshirt that I'd bought earlier that week at John's Bargain Store on Avenue C for 69 cents. My skin was tanned from the sun, burnished ruddy with the heat and much loving. My hair was newly trimmed and freshly washed with that particular crispness that it always develops in sustained summer heat. I felt raunchy and restless. We walked out of the hot August afternoon sun into the sudden dark coolness of Laurel's downstairs. There was Muriel with her black Bermuda shorts and shirt, ghost pale, her eternal cigarette in hand. And I was beside her, full of myself, knowing I was fat and black and very fine. We were without peer or category, and on that day I was conscious of being very proud of it, no matter who looked down her nose at us. After Muriel and I had gotten our food and beer and copped one of the tables. Thank you. Hey, that's a great tan you have there. I didn't know Negroes got tans. And her broad smile was intended to announce the remark as a joke. Well, look, my usual defense in such situations was to ignore the overtones, to let it go, and I would have. But Dottie Dawes, probably out of her own nervousness at Paulie's reference to what was, of course, unmentionable color, wouldn't let the matter drop. So she raved on and on about my great tan, matched her arm up beside mine, shook her pale blonde head, telling whoever would listen that she wished she could tan like that instead of burning all the time. And did I know how lucky I was to be able to get such a tan like that? And I got tired. Dottie, how come you never make so much over my natural tan most days, Dottie Dawes? How come? And there was a moment of silence at the table, punctuated only by Muriel's darkly appreciative chuckle, and then we move on to something else, mercifully. And I never forgot it. In the gay bars, I longed for other black women without the need ever taking shape upon my lips. For 400 years in this country, black women have been taught to view each other with the deepest of suspicion. And it was no different in the gay world. Most black lesbians were closeted, correctly recognizing the black community's lack of interest in our position, as well as the many more immediate threats to our survival as black people in a racist society. It was hard enough to be black and female, to be black, female, and gay. But to be black, female, gay, and out of the closet in a white environment, even to the extent of dancing in the bagatelle, was considered by many black lesbians to be simply suicidal. Which, by the way, is why it is so important. Why it is so important to say, yeah, it is possible to be a black lesbian and live to tell the story. And that's why I say it all the time. But in 1956, if you were black and fool enough to do it, you'd better come on so tough that nobody messed with you. So I often felt put down by other black lesbians' sophistication, their clothes, their manners, their cars, their femmes. The black women I usually saw around the bag were into heavy roles, and it frightened me. This was partly the fear of my own blackness mirrored, and partly the realities of the masquerade. The need for power and control seemed a much too open piece of myself, dressed in the enemy's clothing. They were tough in a way I felt I could never be. And even if they were not, their self-protective instincts warned them to appear that way. By white America's racist distortions of beauty, black women playing femme had very little chance in the bagatelle. There was a constant competition among butches to have the most gorgeous femme on their arm, and gorgeous was defined by white male standards. So for me, going into the bagatelle alone was like entering an anomalous no woman's land. I wasn't cute or passive enough to be femme, and I wasn't mean or tough enough to be butch. So I was given a very wide berth. Because non-conventional people in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 90s can be dangerous, even in the gay community. With the exception of Felicia and myself, the other black women in the bagatelle came protected by a show of all the power symbols they could muster. Whatever else they did during the week, on Friday nights when Lion or Trip appeared, sometimes with expensively dressed, light-skinned women on their arms, sometimes alone, they commanded instant attention and admiration. They were well-heeled, superbly dressed, high-controlled high-steppers who drove convertibles, bought rounds of drinks for their friends, and generally took care of business. But sometimes even they couldn't get in unless they were recognized by the bouncer. My friends and I were the hippies of the gay girl circuit before the word was coined. Many of us wound up dead or demented, and many of us were distorted by the many fronts that we had to fight upon. But when we survived, we grew up strong. Every black woman I ever met in the village in those years has some part in my survival, large or small, if only as a figure in the head count at the bag on Saturday nights. Black lesbians in the bagatelle faced a world only slightly less hostile than the outer world which we had to deal with every day, that world which defined us as doubly nothing because we were black and because we were women. That world that raised our blood pressures and shaped our furies and our nightmares. The temporary integration of war plants, the egalitarian myth of Rosie the Riveter, had ended abruptly with the end of World War II and the wholesale return of American women to the role of little wife. So far as I could see, gay girls were the only black and white women, however, who were even talking to each other in this country outside of the empty rhetoric of patriotism and political movements. Black or white, kai-kai, butch or femme, the only thing we shared often and in varying proportions was that we dared for connection in the name of woman and saw that as our power rather than our problem. And all of us who survived those common years had to be a little strange. We spent so much of our young womanhood trying to define ourselves as women-identified women before we even knew the word existed, let alone that there were ears interested in trying to hear them beyond our immediate borders. So all of us who survived those common years have to be a little proud, a lot proud. Keeping ourselves together and on our own tracks, however wobbly, was like trying to play the Dinizulu war chant or a Beethoven sonata on a tin dog whistle. The important message seemed to be you had to have a place. Whether or not it did justice to whatever you felt you were about, there had to be some place to refuel, to check your flaps. And in times of need and great instability, the place sometimes became more a definition than the substance of why you needed it to begin with. Beware, because sometimes the retreat becomes the reality. So there were writers who posed in cafes, talking their work to death without writing 2 words. There were lesbians, virile as men, hating women and their own womanhood with a vengeance. The bars and the coffee shops and the streets of the village in the 50s were full of nonconformists who were deathly afraid of going against their hard-won group. And so eventually they too were broken between the group and their individual need. For some of us, there was no one particular place. We grabbed whatever we could from wherever we found space, comfort, quiet. Being women together was not enough. We were different. Being gay girls together was not enough. We were different. Being black together was not enough. We were different. Being black women together was not enough. We were different. Being black dykes together was not enough. We were different. For some of us, there was no one particular place. We grabbed whatever we could from wherever we found space, comfort, quiet, a smile, non-judgment. It was a while before we came to realize that our place was the very house of difference, rather than the security of any one particular difference, and often we were cowards in the learning. It was years before we learned to use the strength that daily surviving brings, years before we learned fear does not have to incapacitate, years before we could appreciate each other on terms not necessarily our own. The black gay girls in the village gay bars of the 50s knew each other's names, but we seldom looked into each other's black eyes. lest we see our own aloneness, our own blunted power mirrored in the pursuit of darkness. And some of us died inside the gaps between the mirrors and those turned up eyes. Sister outsiders, Dee Dee and Tommy and Muff. I pour libation for Iris and Lion and Trip, and Diana and Felicia and Bernie and Addie. Addie, for example, Addie was Mary Evans' beautiful and wasted. Driven as we were all driven, she found ways out that were alien to some of the rest of us, harsher, less hidden. So that Sunday afternoon, while Muriel and I sat eating in the Bagatelle, sat eating in Laurel's, waiting for Felicia and our photography lesson, Addie was turning Flea on to smack for the first time in a borrowed apartment across 2nd Avenue. We are making history, whether we actively involve ourselves in it or not. I urge each one of you to examine how you can use whoever you are in the service of what you say you believe. It's circular, so now's your time. There are questions, comments, cries of outrage. What is needed to complete the circle is response from you. So you've got about 6 minutes, so you'd better talk fast.
Are you writing the sequel to Zami?
It's Zami. Zami. No. Zami is a biomythography. It is not only an autobiography. It is a piece of fiction made up of my life and the life of many women, black lesbians of the time. I am working on a novel, which is the work that I'm doing right now. It's not a sequel to Zami, but the main character of the novel, Diotha Chambers, her name is. She is a black lesbian mother in the late 60s and early 70s, raising 3 children and doing a variety of things. One of them is trying to organize a black studies department in a small urban college. So I'm getting to know her very well, Diotha, and since I've never written a novel before, I'm getting to know a lot about novels. Well, you know, I keep writing her notes every once in a while in the last year or so, asking her that, and she doesn't answer. So I presume she is as ornery as she has always been. I'd be very happy to talk about Kitchen Table Press. When I talk about involving ourselves, putting ourselves behind those things that we believe, I always like to give an example of how I try to put into practice the things. You know, it sounds like I say these things very glibly. They roll off my tongue. They don't. They come out of my life. They come out of my living. And part of the way in which I have kept myself alive is by being passionately involved in doing things in which I do believe. And one of the things I believe in is taking part in those institutions that come out of our community, black women's institutions, and Kitchen Table is one of them. CISA, the Sisterhood in Support of Sisters in South Africa, is another. The Caribbean Children's Space, for example, now that I live in St. Croix, is yet a third. These are groups that are attempting to do on a grassroots level what I believe needs being done. What can I tell you about Kitchen Table? I can tell you that I do not have the relationship with it that I once did, but it is an institution that I support. It is being kept alive almost single-handedly, but not completely, by Barbara Smith, who is now living in Albany. There are a number of women who volunteer. Kitchen Table has gone into reprinting of the books that it can. Things have picked up in the last year since more editions have come out. The last two books that have been published were collections of poetry, one by Mitsuya Yamada, who is here, right, and a collection of short stories. I, as a matter of fact, have some catalogs, Kitchen Table catalogs, with me. If you would like to come up, would you like to see one of them? Would you? Yes. Thank you, Gloria. This is a catalog, one of Kitchen Table's newest catalogs. I urge you to get it. I urge you to send for the books, to buy the books, to read them, and to respond to them. Does that answer your question? Okay. Now would you like to hear about CISA? The Sisterhood in Support of Sisters in South Africa. The Sisterhood in Support of Sisters in South Africa, CISA. CISA, by the way, is a Xhosa word which means mercy. It was an organization that was started by Dr. Gloria Joseph in 1984. I am one of the founding mothers, as is Janetta Cole, Andre Nicola McLaughlin, a number of other women. There are 6 of us in all. We attempt to share the resources of North American women with our sisters in South Africa, and it is direct aid. We do fundraising whenever we can. The function is double, both to raise money for women's collectives in Soweto and to further education in this country about what is still happening in Soweto, what is still going on in South Africa. When I said to you before that terrible things are being done in our name, when I say that when we do not recognize where our power is, we do not use it, it is used against us. South Africa is a very good example. Because of the kind of whiteout that happened, the news of the emergency about a year and a half ago, South Africa seems to have drifted away from most people's consciousness. The terrible state of apartheid in South Africa is more than a question of whether your university divests or not. We are part of an international community of women. We have power in this country as women. Each one of us sitting here is a citizen of the most powerful country in this world. And each of us is a citizen of a country that stands upon the wrong side of every single liberation struggle on earth. So wherever you find yourselves, however you define your power, if each one of us is not putting that power actively into altering that situation, we are contributing to the oppression of 2/3 of the world's women. That's just for starters, okay? For those of us who are black, may I remind us again, as I said, that the women of South Africa look to us in wonderment at the waste of the power we have. Part of that power is economic. Right? We deal in CISA with 2 groups, the Zamani Soweto Sisters and the Maggie Mugabe Trust Fund. These are organizations, small groups of community women who have been involved in educational programs, in literacy programs, in teaching small groups of women in the surrounding area, needlework, independent trades. They came together as a result of the 1976 massacre of children in Soweto, the hero children. Many of them are mothers and relatives of the children who died in the 1976 rebellion. They came together in memory of their children's blood. We collect money. We send the money that we collect to these 2 groups. We operate through an English account which has been set up by Ellen Kuzwayo. Some of you may know her book, Call Me Woman, is the title of it. She's a South African woman writer. I urge, for example, those of you who are interested and able to think about organizing a CISA group here. I have also brought along some CISA flyers for you to see. All right. That will tell you a little bit more about the organization. Most of all, give you our address and tell you where you can send your checks, your contributions, and most importantly, when you decide to organize a group here. There are a number of films concerning what is going on in South Africa done by Betty Walpert, who is an English filmmaker. Awake from Mourning is one. It tells the story of the Maggie Mugabe Trust Fund and of the Zamani Soweto sisters. The most recent one, Mama, Am I Crying?, deals with what is actually happening on the streets today. Mama, Am I Crying started out as a film dealing with a black and a white woman growing up in South Africa and their different views. But the second part of the film really deals with the comrades, with the young black children out of Soweto who are laying their lives on the line, who are putting who they are in the service of what they believe, and many of them dying for it. It is a very moving and very accurate film. These films should be acquired. They should be shown. Why is it that we always expect our oppressors, expect the master to supply us with information that will help us rebel? You do not find the story of South Africa in newspapers that are owned partially by South Africans. But the information is there, and each of us has a responsibility to get it. So I would strongly urge those of you who are interested to pursue Kitchen Table, to pursue CISA. Those of you who are interested in education, I will tell you a little bit about the Caribbean Children's Space, which is a black school begun by one woman, Yolanda Reed, who is now known as UTA, in St. Croix, and is spreading. It is a movement for the indigenous children of St. Croix to have an education different from what is being offered. These are only 3 institutions that I am involved with. There are many others. It is up to you to find them. It is up to you to begin them, to start them within your communities. Right? The power you waste is being used against us. Mm-hmm. Love poem. Oh, yeah. I don't think I have it. I'm sorry, I didn't bring. Oh, you did.
Here it is.
Okay. Are there other comments? I will end with this. Yes.
You mentioned, using who you are and what you believe in. But sometimes I think this is not an instantaneous process. I mean, sometimes
You're so right.
a lifetime to figure out.
Well, I hope it doesn't take a whole lifetime, my dear, because if it will be, we're sending little cryptic messages on the Ouija board, right? Bless you. It is very hard. Nobody descends like an angel, like the Holy Ghost, and touches you and suddenly makes us brave, romantic, true, strong. It doesn't happen that way. We get strong by doing the thing we need to be strong for. So there's always that little risk. And yes, you're afraid. We will always be afraid. If we wait until we're not afraid to move, not afraid to act, as I said, we'll be sending little messages on the Ouija board. You practice it. You stand up in a classroom and you say something that you believe. Right? And maybe you'll get slapped down, but maybe you won't. No one is going to pull out an Uzi and shoot you down in UCLA for saying something that is, right? Not yet. Out there, maybe they will. But you learn how to speak up where you begin. And I always say, again, someone says to me, how did you become this or that? Hey, listen, I started out like we all start out, a coward. A coward, right? Determined to live. That's all I had. It begins from there. It begins, and a little bit. You speak up once. You say something to the cab driver that makes a racist remark. Right? And the next time, maybe it'll be a little easier. Maybe your voice won't crack when you say it. It starts there. It's in little things. It's step by step, learning to take a position. And the next time, it's a little easier. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we lose. Right? Sometimes he stops the car and says, "Get out." Hey, there's another one comes along. What I'm saying is it isn't all easy, but it isn't all impossible either. The rumor you can't fight City Hall is circulated by City Hall. You're never going to do it alone. That's the other thing. Right? It's so important to testify. It's so important to say these things. It's so important to know isolation is corrosive and it is dangerous. It is anti-revolutionary too, which is why so many of us exist in isolation. Right? Get together. If there are two of us doing something, maybe next week there'll be four. You need to know you are not alone. And you have a responsibility to make whoever you identify with know they are not alone either. That's what organization is about. And we need to be building institutions, to find institutions that we can affiliate ourselves with, or if they do not exist, to create them. It doesn't take a lifetime, right? Every way, step along the way. I love to read from Zami because I remember all the things I didn't know. But I remember all the things I did know and didn't use, and that's what hurts me most of all. Mm-hmm.
Were you involved in the Salt and Soul Sisters with the Community Center in New York? And is it still happening? And how many times?
Yes, the Salsa Soul Sisters is still surviving. It's the oldest black dyke organization in New York City. It's about 12 years old now. It functions out of the Gay Community Center on 13th Street now. That's where they hold their meetings, and it goes along. The question was, why do I say that black women have been taught to treat each other with suspicion more so than all other women? Is there someone here who'd like to respond to that? No. All right. Because black women, the history of black women for the 400 years within this country that has been represented, when we were brought here as objects, and we were taught to suspect ourselves in terms of our humanity, our race, as well as our sex. I think that since it has been one of the tools to keep us separate, not only as women, but as black people, the suspicion is much greater. That's why. I could get a little more technical, but I think that covers it. Did I speak to your question?
I spent a long time in my life involved in political quote-unquote organizations and yet felt totally alienated from myself. And making that transition from what I've heard you do, and I realize you're a real person too, so has been inspiring, and also it's good to see other women do that, because I know for me it's been real hard to heal this split, to be able to take my life and make that individual as, what I can say in the room, or what I can as a healer.
You have to understand that one of the functions of Western, or maybe a My opinion, my opinion, my opinion. One of the functions, in case you think I'm sounding academic, I'm not. It's just what I've learned in dust and ashes and blood in academia, which is one of the functions of Western institutions, education, is not real learning. It's to teach you how to sit and absorb. It's to teach you how to absorb without use. To sit. Take it all in, take it all in, take it all in. Don't use it, don't integrate it, don't let it percolate inside of you and move you to action. Just absorb, absorb, and absorb, right? Well, I think that real learning has to do with discovering the intersection between what you take in and what you give out, so that what you take in fuels some kind of activity, right? If you can think about that a lot, wherever you get into an organization, a class, an activity, you will be able to pull more upon who you are, which is a strengthening position, and you will also be able to move in some more coherent way. Are you following what I'm saying? It's a shorthand, but that's... And then that question of the split doesn't become so bad. I think we all experience it because it's part of the way in which we live and grown up. That lack of integrity, that lack of integration between what we feel, what we believe, what we think, what we know. We try to pull them together and recognize them as a fuel for change. I mean, none of us, I don't think anyone in this room thinks that we don't need to change. I think we all agree that change is inevitable. I think we may not all agree on what changes need to take place, but I think we all agree that change is inevitable. But if I ask you, how are you working for that change, you have a real responsibility. And it doesn't have to be the way the person next to you is working for it. Wherever we are, wherever I find myself, there is something that needs to be done. And each one of us has got to learn how to put ourselves behind what has to be done, wherever we are, wherever we are.
And that connection, I'd like to particularly thank you for the after school management health. I found that to be a particularly animating response to the pressures of institutions to have you do it their way, to not use your power where you are. And I just feel I need to say that this is happening at an academic institute here. What we're doing here is larger than that boundary. I particularly wanted to thank you for that. That remains a very vital piece of wisdom for me.
I'm glad. Good. Yes.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say I just admire you tremendously. And also, in San Diego, there's an organization called Sisterhood, and it's composed of very intelligent, beautiful, political black women. And it's a wonderful organization, and the purpose is for the empowerment of women, black women. And when I attend these meetings, I find that the subject in about 10 minutes strays to our men. And so usually if I can't change the subject, I'll chime in and talk about my girlfriend, which doesn't go over very well. And but one thing, I don't understand why we as black women always have to define ourselves by our men. I understand that, yes, I am black, definitely, and they're part of my race, and I love them too, but I don't understand why just spending an hour just dedicated to ourselves just can't happen. And then also the homophobia just drives me crazy. So any suggestions?
I have a number of suggestions. I think you're a very brave young woman. I have a number of suggestions. First of all, I would strongly urge you. Are you a lesbian?
Yes, I am.
Well, I take my hat off to you for being able to say that you should practice that. You should find other black lesbians, other lesbians of color, and make a place where you can feel safe. Right? Even if there are 2 of you, 3 of you, 6 of you, make it. Do it. With a great deal of urgency, I'm telling you, that is absolutely necessary. To begin with, without it, you get really weird after a while. Right? Even if you survive, you get really weird because it goes in isolation. Right? But you need that. It is possible now. We have worked to make that possible. You must do it. Do not abandon the other group, though. It is absolutely essential that our sisters recognize that we are their sisters. Right? We are intimately involved with black men because there will always be within the black nation black men. It is not our sole concern. I have found, as a matter of fact, that black lesbians in general have a much clearer take on the black male, black female split because we are not so involved with the emotional deprivations that happen within these relationships. That's something you might bring up, but you don't have to. It mightn't be accepted too well. I think that within that group, what you might need to do is to, A, bring a perspective that you have about black men, right, to shine in it, and at the same time encourage them perhaps to spend some time on ourselves, on themselves, on yourselves as black women. Bring, for example, you know the essay Eye to Eye in Sister Outsider? I wrote it as an organizing tool for black women. Xerox it, bring it to them, talk about some of the interactions, right? Talk about what happens when the cutthroat male stuff comes up, how you deal with it. Why is it dealt with in such cruel ways? You know? You deal with people where they are at, and hopefully you move the group to a place where you want them to be. But in the meantime, you are not responsible for altering the psyche of people who cannot accept you. You can take part in them and recognize what each of the groups give you. And you must have a group where you feel articulated and accepted. And if it doesn't exist, you have a responsibility to make it. I feel very strongly about that. Yes. You.
I just wanted to make a comment that I enjoyed what you had to say. It's very inspiring, very necessary, especially in this time for this stressful part of the semester. And I too am an aspiring black lesbian literary in a very, very white male department. And
That's
I know
really
I
hard.
when I listen to your words or listen to other black people before me, when they were illustrated by
Oh, I'm really so glad to hear you say that. I really want you to know how important it is for me to look up and see your faces, to see black women's faces. I want you to know that it gives me something that is particular and special, without which I could not continue to do what I do. And somewhere there is someone in this room who needed more than anything else to hear what you just said and to hear what you just said. It's one thing. People think, oh, hey, look, Audre Lorde, right? She walks on water. I don't, but it's very easy. It's necessary to hear you and you say that and say you are surviving. If there's ever one black lesbian within the sound of our voices when we say it, then it's necessary. So good luck to you. Good luck to you, my sister. Yes. Yes. I think it's big enough.
I think so too.
Besides, I saw the table come. I looked for you on the battle lines.